seek to balance serving people and planet with shareholder satisfaction, we're questioning whether this method of pitting profits against ethics is an outmoded approach to business that will neither solve climate change, population growth, or resource depletion. How can businesses contend with the pressures of the short term while being part of a necessary long-term transition? This panel is led by Suresh Mistry, Global Director of Alquity, and we will share ideas on transformation strategies. Thank you, Suresh.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. Really inspiring to hear Catherine, and as an institutional investor, I hope to be able to support her views and tell you about the things we do at Alquity. I'm very lucky to be joined by a great panel, and we'll start by short introductions about our businesses and our view on this subject of ethics versus profits, and then we'll actually go into Q&A. So please, if you have any questions, write them down, and then we'll hope to answer them later on in the session. If I could move forward, let me just introduce myself. Alquity. Alquity is a business I represent. We're an investment management firm based out of London, and we invest in emerging and frontier markets. So we invest in places like Asia, Latin America, and Africa. I have a short video, which is our brand manifesto, which I'd just like to share with you. If I can have some volume. Oops, let me go back. See if do we have volume? I'll try again. No?
No to the old-fashioned greedy ways of investing, where fat cats make a fast buck, regardless of consequences. We are different. We say yes to capitalism with a conscience. We believe that doing good is good business. We invest in high-potential businesses, but only those that are well-run. Companies that look after their people, communities, and the environment, because these companies deliver better returns in the long run. We believe every person on the planet deserves the opportunity to succeed. So we share up to 25% of our fees to give people a hand up in the places where we invest. By creating more chances to succeed, we help local economies develop and thrive. This in turn helps fuel our investments. We are different. There is another way. It's time to make a choice. Choose to make money without selling your soul. Alquity, life-changing investments. The world of investment is
Yeah, get it twice. As you can see, quite hard hitting. That represents Alquity, and what I'd like to show is what that is based upon and how it relates to the question we're dealing with today, ethics versus profit. At Alquity, we're an asset management business, and asset management businesses have to deliver returns for our investors. We don't exist if we don't. And our first goal is to do that, and we do that by investing in some of the fastest growing markets in the world. Africa, Asia, places like that. And we're working on long-term themes. I think the key thing here is the asset management industry can be very short-termist. Our view is to focus on the long term. So we're working on things like urbanization. That's going over 10, 20, 30 years in places like Africa and Asia. We're looking at demographic changes, the younger populations coming through, and looking at things like urbanization as more and more people move into cities, etc. To do this, we use a responsible investment approach. Catherine referred to it, this thing called environmental, social, and governance. What it basically says is, we're not that concerned. We do have some sectors we don't invest in. We're not that concerned about what the company does. We care about how it does it. So we investigate how they respect the environment, how they minimize their pollution, how they look after their employees, how they look after the communities they work with, and how well they're governed. These three elements are critical for two reasons. One, because then we actually are investing in companies we feel happy and can sleep at night, having invested in them. But secondly, these companies do perform better. The evidence that Catherine referred to is mounting. These companies, over the long term, deliver better returns and are at less risk of kind of PR blow-ups. Take the BP example last week, but you can also take Volkswagen as an example and a whole list of other companies. So in our belief, and the evidence now proves, these things help drive better returns for our investors. And finally, we turn that ESG lens around and point it at ourselves. Catherine mentioned that institutional investors need to think about CSR and ESG in their own businesses. So what we do is, from our fee revenue, not from the returns investors make, we donate up to 25% to projects in the areas we invest, in places like Africa, in places like Asia. We have two goals there. Firstly, we want to give people equal opportunities. Somebody's opportunities in life should not be determined by where they are born. It should be determined by their ability and the effort they put into achieving their success. And secondly, and critically in the asset management space, if we can take somebody from $1 a day to $10 a day, they become a future consumer. And what do? They buy the products, mobile phones, retail, whatever it may be, of the companies we invest in. This is about taking a long-term view on the economy and saying we will contribute at the bottom to help the economy grow over the long term. And this is the Alquity virtuous circle model. Sounds brilliant, sounds conceptually a great idea, but does it work? Because we are in one of the toughest industries in terms of challenge and competitors that you can imagine. Let me just share some data in terms of our performance today. We have around $100 million in assets, which is tiny, but we're growing very fast. We're growing about 10% a month at the moment in terms of assets. We have 5 funds. People say, well, how can you be so small and do this great work and still deliver performance? And my Latin American fund is the #1 performing fund in the world. So we have some of the best investment products out there. This is critical for ethical and responsible businesses. We've got something like 100 and over 300 intermediaries and 100 platforms. It's like being on the shelf at Tesco. Being on a platform is the equivalent of being on the shelf. We've managed to get on some of the most important shelves of the investment management industry across the world. At the same time, last year we were voted the Social Impact Investor of the Year by Investment Week, one of the major investment industry magazines. And at the same time, we've transformed over 23,000 lives in Africa, Asia, and Latin America. So this question about ethics versus profit, we don't think of it like that. We think ethics is actually more profit. And we can, in terms of how do we do that, and it's one thing, delivering it. What is it that drives us at Alquity? It's this basic mission. And I think this is something that's really important to businesses. We want to, first of all, build a world-class investment business. It's not about being a nice business that just does some good things, because our investors won't put money with us if we like that. They put money with us because we are a world-class investment business. And that's critical. Secondly, we want to transform how people invest. To be more considerate, include those ESG factors in their investment decision making. But that also means we have to have a competitive difference. Because if we're to survive, we have to be a competitive business and a competitive product. And finally, our mission, our purpose, to create a better, fairer world. Better because investment returns are better for investors, for shareholders, for employees, and for our clients and partners. So everybody wins. And that's a kind of a quick summary of Alquity and an introduction into who we are and what we do. I'd now like to take the opportunity to introduce Claudine, who can introduce herself and
Great. Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. I'm not going to take you through what the Crown Estate does because I only have 5 minutes, and it takes a lot longer than that to talk about the Crown Estate. Except to say that we're really a real estate organisation, and we have about £12 billion worth of assets across the UK. So I'm going to talk about a few themes that I think are sort of creating a bit of a revolution at the moment. So first thing is purpose. I think a lot of organisations are starting to think that they need a purpose, that creating profit for the next 6 months isn't a purpose. It's something that happens because of your purpose. So we're seeing a lot of that happen. It's about the long term. So if organisations are not clear about their long-term purpose, I think they're going to disappear. It's about them also knowing what's material to their business. So they've got to go through that whole materiality process to find out what that is. So some examples. Kingfisher, they've decided they have a purpose. They're better homes, better lives. Unilever, creating a better future for everybody. Wow, that's an amazing purpose. The other trend, I think, is around transparency. Every individual has the power to speak, and people listen to them. Digital media. And that's going to grow and grow and grow as new generations come on board. So they can be really disruptive if they want to. We've got lots of new business models coming up. Airbnb, wow, fantastic. They are succeeding like there's no tomorrow. And there's lots of others, Uber and other business models that are coming on board. There's lots of systemic change going on. People aren't thinking about just one part of their business. They're thinking about, in order to really change things, they have to partner up. They have to look at the whole value chain. Stakeholder capitalism. Organisations are starting to realise they're not there by themselves. They actually have stakeholders. Some of them even think now they have customers. A good example, Catherine mentioned Aviva. Their pensioners are their customers. They're suddenly realising they have them, and they're going to invite them to come and talk to them. Wow, big concept. Tesco's known they've got customers for years. So there's suddenly this awareness that there are stakeholders. And increasing value and reducing resources. Value has a different meaning for organisations. Value isn't just about creating the financial profit, but suddenly they think they've got to have a social value, an environmental value. And that's starting to take shape. This is a project the Crown Estate's doing, and this is just to demonstrate that you cannot think of yourself as an organisation by yourself and try and do everything yourself, because you're using all of your resources and you won't be able to have a bigger impact. If you partnered with other organisations, you would. So we're partnering with other landowners across the West End and the Wildlife Trust to deliver this whole green infrastructure, the whole of Regent Street and St James's. I can talk to you about it at break time maybe, but that's just to mention you can't do things by yourself. We're starting to realise that our organisations don't just depend on one capital. So we only think we have financial capital, that's the one we measure, and that's the one we get judged on. But what about all the environmental capital that we depend on to exist as organisations? The human capital, the social capital, why aren't we measuring those just like we're measuring the financial capital? Well, we do at the Crown Estate. So we have taken all the capitals and we are measuring them. We have KPIs around them, we have metrics around them, and they're all monetised. And our next integrated report, which will be out in June, will have some of these figures in it. We don't do a separate corporate responsibility or sustainability reporting. So we think that methodology that we've developed, which is called total contribution, highlights the non-financial impacts in financial terms that the Crown Estate has. It also helps us to make better, richer, fuller decisions, because we can take those metrics and say, this is the financial impact, but then, hang on a minute, there's a carbon impact here, and this is how much it's going to cost us. So the board can make those decisions that are much more informed, that they couldn't before. And the last thing I want to say is, let's have less green hush. Let's not be shy about all this fantastic stuff that people are doing. Let's go out and shout about it. There's lots of different ways you can shout about it. The more you do, the more people will get enthusiastic. Thank you very much.
I should have a few slides. If not, I'm going to be left hanging. There we go. I'm going to deliver now in 5 minutes a lecture I deliver a number of business skills through the UK in 45 minutes. So it's a little bit rushed, you'll excuse me. It's based on the premise that the UK is now going through, the biggest untold story in business in the UK right now is the rise of social enterprise. It's been happening for possibly 2 decades. In the last 5 years or so, politicians of all political persuasions have woken up to it, and I actually think that it is the game in town now as far as business ethics is concerned. And hopefully the facts I will now present will articulate that. So the background that we're faced with is Edelman, they're the biggest PR agency in the world, and they've been doing these surveys every year, and they've reported that there's not just a lack of trust in business now, across virtually all of the world, there's a lack of trust in all institutions, whether it's the media, government, the church, business. But more worryingly, they've picked up in the last survey, there's actually a disconnect now between the top 15% of the population in each country and the rest, call it the 85%. So whilst trust in the institutions has started to recover in the last few years amongst, I don't want to use the word the elite, but the 15%, trust is still low and falling amongst the 85%. And we see that across the world with the rise of various political movements. So we've got a problem. Business knows this. Here's the latest statistics from the PwC survey of CEOs from across the world. And if you see the graph I bring there, that business is concerned in the lack of trust in business is rising and it's going through the roof. So, is CSR, as we understand it, the answer to the question? Now, I use John Brown here as an example. John Brown, who was CEO of BP for 12 years, and in 8 of those years, BP was rated by the CSR community, the intelligentsia, as the first or second most responsible business in the world, on various indices. First or second for 8 of those 12 years. And here we've now got John Brown saying CSR is dead. He's saying it's failed, it's irrelevant, it's small and uninspiring. Now, he partly said this because he had a book to sell, and that was the headline of his book. I don't believe CSR is dead. I believe CSR is as strong as it's ever been in the last 20 years. When I look back at the early parts of my career, we could win awards, world global CSR awards, for sticking a bit of fair trade in a vending machine and a bit of recycled paper in a photocopier. And we were lauded by ministers. I mean, that's how bad it was in the old days. BP were winning these awards because they killed slightly less people on their operations than the peers. So let's get this straight. There was no golden era. The best stuff that I've ever seen happen is happening now. However, what I would argue is it has peaked. And I think CSR has peaked, and even people like Paul Polman at Unilever, who most people would regard as the out-and-out leader on CSR, Paul Polman is saying, I can't go any further with my business as a listed enterprise. I've hit a wall. I can't take the shareholders with me. So I think the answer to what's coming down the track is based on an observation that Brown makes himself, that the reason CSR is failing is because the CSR activities are not of the purpose of the enterprise, and that's actually what a social enterprise is about. This idea of rethinking purpose, looking at the purpose of the organisation, again the recent PwC survey, nearly a quarter of these big businesses across the world had actually repurposed their organisation in the past couple of years. And they've done it to put social issues into the purpose of the business. I'm not saying it was the purpose, but it was a purpose. This is the big new trend coming through. So what is a social enterprise? There's many, many definitions. Richard Branson would claim blooming Virgin's a social enterprise while he's sitting in his tax savings, avoiding any tax. A social enterprise, I would always go with the Social Enterprise UK definition, which is it must have its social ethos embedded in its mission. It must trade, it's not a charity, it must trade, and it must have a clear answer to what it does with its profits. If we go with that type of definition, I'd say we've had two real breakthrough areas of social enterprise. The first was in the mid-19th century with the co-ops. The co-ops came through, began in 1844, Rochdale pioneers, and really we had co-ops and mutuals across the world. And I'll show you some stats of how big that still is. But then in the 70s, we started to see a new movement emerge. It called itself social enterprise, it was different. It was your big issues, it was your body shops, etc. And in the last 5 years, we've seen governments across the world look at this and say, you know what, I like it, I want more of this in my society. So we've got a Conservative government that is actually leading developments such as social investment tax relief, social investment ISAs. We're seeing the invention of new corporate forms, the community interest company, which didn't even exist. So this whole area is smashing through. Just look at co-ops. Now, co-ops is a subsector of social enterprise. Co-ops on their own, more than 2 million, more people employed in co-ops than all the world's multinationals put together, 1 billion members, so 20% of the planet. Everything from Barcelona Football Club to Green Bay Packers. If you like champagne, Parmesan cheese and Parmesan, they're nearly all entirely produced by co-ops. Some of these co-ops are enormous. There's one in India, a fertiliser co-op. It's got 56 million farmer members. These are enormous, enormous enterprises, but we don't hear about it. Just the top 300 co-ops, Just the top 300 of those 2.6 million. The top 300 have a turnover that's equivalent to the Brazilian economy and is just behind the UK economy. Like I said, that's just co-ops, which is a subset of social enterprises. In the UK, back to the UK, there's about 6,000 co-ops. Most people will say there's 70,000 social enterprises. The government, as at times, said there's 690,000 social enterprises, based on the fact that a quarter of SMEs self-define themselves as a social enterprise, which is nonsense. So if we just go with the 70,000 figure, which is big and it's growing, and we look at the type of numbers that emerge from that, you're talking between 1 million and 2 million people employed in the UK in this social enterprise economy. We're talking about billions and billions of contribution. In Europe, the European Union has also in the last 5 years woken up to this area. So you've now got a situation where the European Union has clarified that 10% of GDP, social enterprises. 1 in 4 new enterprises across Europe, social enterprise. The whole game is changing. And why it matters is social enterprises are tackling the issues the CSR community is scared of. And it is scared of them. And the 2 big issues are executive remuneration and tax avoidance. Year after year, the public in polls say the 2 issues that concern us most on CSR, it's not climate change, it's not human rights, it's not animal welfare, it's executive remuneration and tax avoidance. And the CSR community, with a few rare exceptions, is running away from those issues. I attend various conferences where the CSR professionals are there, and they even had a vote not to discuss tax avoidance. They didn't want to be faced with the conversation. At night and think, flip, I've really ducked that issue again. These are the issues. So I established a social enterprise, it's a community benefit society, 2 years ago, the fair tax mark, and as I thought would happen, it was social enterprises were first in line to go. Mid-Counties Co-op, Unity Trust Bank, Bone Co-op. All there and said, we are going to stand up for paying the right amount of tax in the right place at the right time. Brave PLCs did join, SSC, FTSE 50, Go Ahead, FTSE 350, Marshalls, FTSE 250, AIM-listed businesses, Staffline. Brave PLCs are out there still doing this. But if you look at the bulk of businesses who are stepping onto this and challenging the fair tax, it is the social enterprises, it's Ecology Building Society, it's Radstock, it's Lush, it's all these others. And I think this is the question I would leave right now is, I don't believe CSR's dead, I believe it's as strong as it's ever been. However, I think in the future, unless it reinvents itself, it will be increasingly irrelevant because of the challenge social enterprises will pose, which is ultimately to put the social mission into the purpose of the business. And I would suggest that it's not just I think this, people like Paul Polman now and Unilever are trying to look at whether they can create a B Corporation standard. B Corporation is a form of social enterprise that's come on from the US. Can they create a B Corporation standard for PLCs and multinational enterprises? Because they know they've hit that same ceiling themselves. Thank you.
Follow that. So, good morning, everybody. My name is Simon Reichwald, and I'm from an organisation called MyKindaFuture. And I want to talk to you today about our model of being a social enterprise, and with our specific focus around young people. And it links in really into a number of things we've heard already today, and particularly about this issue of purpose. So just to give you some context, there are 3 million students in state-funded schools here in the UK. Of those, 15% are eligible for free school meals, and almost 30% come from an ethnic minority origin. 83% of those schools do not employ any professional careers advisor in that school. None. And in many cases, the role that is taken up when it comes to advising young people about their future is given to teaching assistants, volunteered geography teachers who are just not placed through no fault of their own to be able to support young people in the choices that they make. Youth unemployment continues to track higher here in the UK than general unemployment. Today, birth and worth have never been more prevalent. Young people today are less likely to change their position in life than their parents or their grandparents. I think that's a frightening situation that we are in. And MyKindaFuture exists to play our part in changing that for the better. And MyKindaFuture are a for-profit social enterprise. And this is the model I want to talk about. And I'm really delighted that we've got an opportunity to talk about this model because it seeks to, and I quote from the material put out in advance of this conference, to challenge the business as usual approach to social responsibility. So we want to share our innovative but not unique approach and how we structured a business model that balances ethics and profits, all with a focus on our specific areas around young people and supporting them. If we look at just, and one of the things that's really important to us and why we've taken the decision to be a for-profit is around scale. We want to have an impact, a significant impact on not just hundreds or thousands or even tens of thousands, but hundreds of thousands of young people. If we look at one previous example of a scaled model of supporting young people when it comes to their future and their careers, it was the Connections service that was provided to schools. But with the cuts following the recession, the Connection service was abandoned and cut. So schools were left with even less provision for their young people because this model was just completely taken away. So at MyKindaFuture, we bring a wide range of employers into schools, colleges and universities. We harness technology, innovation, the energy of young people themselves to help young people become more actively engaged and make the right choices about what they go on to do when they leave education, whether that's the growing apprenticeships opportunities or going on to university, whatever that route happens to be. And the other thing that's hugely important, and it comes back to this issue around purpose, is everyone who works in MyKindaFuture, and we're an SME, you know, so everyone who works within MyKindaFuture really care about our social mission. Really care about our social mission. So how do we sum up our mission? Our mission is to deliver a social impact for young people and their future careers at scale, while simultaneously growing a successful business. We want to be, and we think it is important, to be both, not one or the other. We don't feel you have to be one or the other. So I'm extremely proud that that's what MyKindaFuture is all about as an organisation. And the three pillars that we have in our organisation, coming back to what Paul was talking about, in terms of it being woven into the fabric of the organisation, we have three pillars in MyKindaFuture. Social impact, being a successful company, and ensuring that our team, our people, are the very best that they can be. Now, we're often asked, why don't we, for example, get grant funding rather than the approach that we take is we have investors, so people who invest in our organisation. So why don't we go down the grant funding route? Well, one, we just have no expertise, particularly in it. And it does seem to be that from the outside, from how we look at it, what does tend to happen with a lot of organisations is they can change their direction slightly to fit the grant. And we feel that that would not benefit the social impact that we want to have with young people. So as I said, we have investors. Now our investors, they expect a return, lower than typically venture capitalists might expect, but they still want, and we believe deserve, a return for the investment they put in. And what that investment gives us is the ability to scale and scale up quickly. So, to conclude, do we feel that this model is working? And what do people think about this model, being a for-profit social enterprise? So, within 4 years of startup, that's how long we've been going, we work with 70 of the FTSE 250 companies. Last year, we took employees and ran face-to-face engagements in 1,100 schools in the UK. We won the Unlimited Big Venture Challenge Award and the BIC ARC Award, which is specifically around organisations that deliver sustainable social impact. And if I look at our own social impact report, and coming back to something that we've been talked about today, so we produced an impact report on the social impact that we have. One of the figures in there that I'm really proud of is in our 4 years, we have engaged and helped face-to-face 590,000 young people in that 4-year period. And we believe that a massive part of how we've been able to do that, operate at scale, is by taking a for-profit social enterprise model. So for us, we feel that that model works. It works for the young people that we want to positively impact. I'm running over my time. There's a clock here that you can't see, that says I need to shut up. So thank you for listening, and I hope that provides more food for thought for the questions that will follow. Thank you very much.
Thank you to the panel there for some really insightful and
Key presentations around our subject today. I want to start by a question for the panel, and then we can take questions from the audience. And I'm going to get some apologise straight away for Karen for this question, but hopefully she'll understand the origins of it. We're here at the first National CSR Awards, but should this be the last? And I'd like to ask that to Paul. I think following his presentation, I'm sure he would like to share some thoughts on that.
So I think as I don't want to repeat myself, I think as I was saying, there is people going around now saying CSR is dead, and I think it's just a cheap way to sell books. It is not dead. It's evidenceable, it's never been stronger. I look at some of the things that Unilever's doing now, and they are light years ahead of what the leaders were doing 10 years ago, etc. I think the game's changed slightly, but I do think that the social enterprise, the idea of having, I see CSR as where social mission is a part of the business. I think they are increasingly, if not already, have been now overtaken by businesses where it is the purpose of the business. And I think unless the CSR community ups its game, it will see itself falling further and further back and becoming an irrelevance in the wider debate.
Yeah. I mean, from my perspective on CSR, the origins of CSR for me were very much about an attitude, an approach to how you run your business. It was a value set. Unfortunately, I think the transformation for CSR became something companies did in addition to what they do. It became something they do rather than something they believe and think. And I think what you're saying there, Paul, is about bringing that back and bringing it into the culture and the values of a business rather than just an activity.
And Suresh, if I could just add to that, I think that's absolutely right. I think I think CSR, or however you want to describe it or badge it, needs to be part of the DNA of an organisation. For me, it's not about having a CSR team or some poor lonely CSR person who's fighting this battle on their own. Again, if I think about the world that we inhabit and work in, which is around young people, young people today, when they look at organisations they want to join, they want to join organisations that have a purpose. And that purpose is a social purpose and having a social mission. And if they don't feel that's a genuine part of the fabric, the very nature of the organisation, they're just not interested. They just see through all the kind of marketing blurb that companies put out there. They don't believe it, coming back to this credibility piece. They just don't believe it. They need to genuinely feel that it is part of the fabric of the organisation. And that's the move that I think I see happening, and it's that social enterprise piece. I think it's about organisations who've got a real mission and a purpose that they want to positively impact society. And if I look forward 5 and 10 years, that's how you're going to grow businesses, because you want these young people to join these organisations going forward.
One of the kind of objectives of this session is to look at how we balance the long term with the short term. How do you take the short term pressures and deal with them? I think that's a really important question. Claudine, from your perspective, how do you deal with that at the Crown Estate?
Do I need to press? No, I'm just on. Okay. We look at long-term trends. So at the moment, we're in the middle of coming up with our 2030 aspirations. Without looking at what's coming down the line, what's happening with retail, apparently I've been doing loads of work around futures and future scenarios. One of the biggest things that's really hit me is that there's going to be more change in the next 5 years in retail and the way people buy things and consumerism than there has been in the past 25. Now, are we all geared up for that? No, because I don't think enough organisations are doing that sort of future gazing to see what's going to happen and then bringing that back to the business and start planning through their own business plans year on year on how they're going to get there. Some of it might not happen, but actually there are some really sophisticated ways of trying to come up with what those trends might look like in 15, 20 years' time. That's really interesting. That's how we do it.
And a great example of that, I think, is Paul Pullman, as was mentioned earlier, in Unilever. And I remember a great story from Paul Pullman about his kind of almost his first day in office, and he went to the shareholder meeting, and he basically told the shareholders, if you're only interested in short-term profits, please leave the room now, because I'm not going to produce quarterly earnings reports, and I'm not going to produce earnings guidance. Now that takes courage. I think it's not just a case of actually what you do, it takes, you know, cojones. And I think one of the important things is, from Alquity's perspective, from the business I run, we have to build that into the DNA of our team as much as the product, etc. So we actually have fearlessness as a value in our business. And because we have that, it's the fearlessness of failure. So one thing Paul Pullman says is the reason I did it on that day was I didn't think I would get fired on my first day in office. So it's about that fearlessness, that not fearing failure is a critical part of achieving this balance between short-term and long-term. Now I'd like to kind of throw out to the audience. Anybody got any questions? I think we've got a couple of roving mics. I'll take 2 or 3 questions and then we'll answer it as a panel. So if you'd like to pass the mic. Please just say your name and your organisation and your question. There's a gentleman there.
Thanks. Hi, Adam Woodall from Ethical Performance. Fantastic speeches and really inspirational. And I heard something that you said just when you introduced the panel, which was CSR started about being something about companies believe in and became something companies did. Which initially was like, yeah, I get that, because I'm a believer, CSR believer. But something that there's a lot of evidence that actually creating belief isn't what creates action. It's actually the other way around. Action is what typically creates belief. And so, we don't need everybody to be like us. So my question is that is it not a good thing that it's being done now, rather than being believed in a sense? Or how do we kind of square that circle? Because we don't need everybody to believe in this. We just need a few people, Paul Pullman's maybe, people in here. And how do we keep that momentum going and actually growing, and it kind of growing very much so, yeah.
So how do we actually turn it from something we do to something, you know, keep it going?
Without needing to create belief.
Without needing to. Excellent. Another question, so I'll get the panel to ponder that question while we... Lady there.
Hi, it's Mary Hunter from 3BL Media, and I think I have a similar question to the gentleman over there. One of the speakers on the panel mentioned that, if I get the statistics right, it's, you know, there's 20% of the sophisticated consumers, if you will, and then there's 80% that still aren't there yet. And so, how do we get that remaining 80% to vote with their dollars, vote with their actions? I mean, we heard some good ideas today, but that's been discussed in a conference of CSR practitioners and professionals. That 80% aren't here. And so I think, you know, perhaps investment advisors can play a role in that, perhaps the
So
media.
how do we get this into the mainstream?
Yes.
Absolutely. Great question. Thank you.
Question down here.
Hello.
Yep.
Hi. My name is Sagar. I'm from just in consulting. My question was with regards to tax. So you've got Uber, you've got HSBC. Every few days, something else or other. You've got Lady Margaret Hodge, who's very persistent on this issue. With regards to tax, if you got people working in the square mile or Shoreditch area, they're working for companies like this, and they're seeing these companies and they're using the service. They're growing up with companies, and they get used to companies that are not paying tax. What does that tell them? That says that if I can work for a company that doesn't pay it, I can create a company that also doesn't pay it as well. So that's that. And also, with regards to CSR, with regards to CSR, why call it? I think the problem is not so much that it's dead. Maybe it's just a name change. Why corporate? Why not enterprise or cooperative social responsibility or something else?
So we sneaked in two questions there. One about tax and the culture, that kind of breed, but also is the CSR type of the right one.
Anybody in the panel like to take one of the first question around, is it about doing, just about doing CSR rather than believing?
I think, does this work? Does this work? No. Yes, no. How does that happen? Well, I'm just going to talk at it and maybe it'll start working. I think I'd actually challenge the point about belief versus action. I think, and again comes back to purpose. I think if I take our organisation, so MyKindaFuture, the belief that everyone has in the organisation about what we do drives everything that we do. So I think belief is massively important. I think it's hugely important. And it's that purpose. So why do we do what we do? Not what do we do, not how do we do it, but why do we do it? And I think we're certainly as an organisation doing a lot of work on really getting absolute clarity on that why and that purpose, because I think that creates a really inspiring place to be, and I think and that leads to greater performance from everybody. But I would actually challenge the point, and I would say actually belief is where it all starts.
Just building on that point,
I was talking to one of my investment team last week and asked how much credence do you put to a CSR report, and he flatly answered 0. The reason being, when you're looking at a business, CSR is about should be about how a business operates, and I think the actions you're talking about should be how a business operates, not what it does in addition to how it operates. So you can't devolve CSR from the operations of the business. It's fundamental in how the business is run. I think the actions you're talking about are absolutely right, but they've got to be ingrained in the business rather than actions done on the side. I hope that kind of goes some way to answer some of your questions. Paul, I think you were quite keen on the answer question around the mainstream taking the product.
My view is I would probably class myself as an angry optimist. And maybe because I've been around this area so long. So I'm old enough to remember when Friends Provident launched this first social responsible investment fund. And the Financial Times called it the Brazil Fund because you'd have to be nuts to invest in it. And now look, it's $1 trillion industry around the globe. I look at fair trade when it started, and co-ops were right at the forefront of fair trade when it started. And we were told there would never be a PLC would take it on board. And now you've even got Nestle and Tesco and Asda and Walmart, etc. And we got the fair tax bar, and we've been told it's crazy. You can't, CSR community won't discuss tax, you won't get anywhere with it. And where the fair tax mark is after 2 years is further ahead than either the social responsible investment movement was or the fair trade movement was at a similar point in time. People forget that for the first 5 years, the only fair trade thing you could buy was fair trade coffee. And they didn't do tea because tea was a blended product and things came from all over the world. It was far too complex. You'll never crack fair trade tea. You're kidding yourself. So I'm deeply optimistic, and there's a thing out there called the Ethical Purchasing Index, which has been going for about 15 years. It's produced by the Ethical Consumer, and what's interesting is you see every single year, even through the big recession we've just had, every single year, ethical consumerism has increased. Every single year. But we don't talk about it because good news doesn't make newspapers. And I think there's a massive, we all deserve in this movement to give ourselves a pat on the back. But for me, this is now just the jumping stage for the next revolution. And that next revolution will be, like I say, social enterprise, and that is work, which is the social mission is the purpose of the business, not a purpose. Because when it's a purpose, CSR becomes the plaything for the chief executive. I can use BP as an example. When John Brown was there, remember the whole Beyond Petroleum? He was going to rebrand the business, and they set up a solar business and a biomass, all gone. He went, it all went. Until it's the purpose of the business, it's the plaything of the chief executive.
Excellent. Thank you very much for that, Paul. And on this question of mainstream, just to kind of finish off and help you there, Alquity, we have that challenge because a lot of people in the industry and particularly our distribution channel, the IFAs, badge ethical investment as only for the person who comes in, excuse the stereotype, but the kind of sandals and etc. They think there's this 1% of the population who will. Actually, all the data even Catherine shared with us this morning shows that actually you're right. There are 80% of the population out there wanting the product. There's one issue is accessibility, the fact that the actual industry itself is just not able to. They don't know enough, to be honest. You know, they just don't know enough about investment. And secondly, asset managers ourselves, we have to present ourselves in front of the JP Morgans, the BlackRocks, the big guys, and compete with them on an equal level. the companies like ourselves, Web, Impact, they compete, we compete on the same level. We don't say, we're going to give you a slightly lower return because we're doing good. We have to be there and we have to be as competitive. Because otherwise, when you're sat with the IFA and you're trying to plan your pension, and the IFA says you can either earn 20,000 or 50,000 a year from this strategy, or 15, are you really going to make that choice? So you need to have really competitive options here. The question on tax and the CSR, I think, Claudine, you were quite keen on answering the renaming of CSR.
Yeah, I'm the chair of the Institute for Corporate Responsibility and Sustainability, so I'll take this moment to plug that as well. And if you're not a member, please become a member. So we're calling it Corporate Responsibility and Sustainability at the Institute. To be honest, I don't care if you call it gobbledygook, as long as it's a part of the strategy of an organisation and they're taking a broader view of everything that affects their business than just the financial short-term aspect. It could be called anything, it doesn't really matter, and it's not separate.
Paul, on that other question of tax avoidance and the culture of tax, and I know you kind of have a fair tax market, what's your thoughts on that?
Some of the tax issues are cultural. So there are certain countries where there is a culture of, unfortunately now, if everybody's at it, I might as well be at it as well. Up to now, we haven't had that culture in the UK. I think the vast majority of people, and a large proportion of businesses, want to pay the right amount of tax at the right place at the right time. I genuinely believe that. However, there is a danger, if everybody starts thinking everybody's at it, everybody will be at it. And I think what's happened is, some of the tax avoidance schemes we've been seeing from Google, and Facebook, and Apple, and Microsoft, they've been so audacious in their just the brazenness, it just puts up things to a new level. And I think we're finally seeing that turn. We're seeing Google and Facebook and others that put an offer on the table. Unfortunately, it's still like the change from the back of the couch. It's not a meaningful solution. But I do think we've turned the corner on tax in this country and probably in Europe. And I think there's a lot of businesses that have built a business model, and when they actually start paying their corporation tax, they're going to find, I think some of those business models are broken. So you take something like Apple, and we all know Apple's great, it hasn't paid tax, it's offshored its tax for something like a decade. When that money gets brought back, their tax bill is enormous. They don't bring it back because the tax bill's so big. They're putting it off and putting it off and putting it off, and it's started to become an issue, and it's started to become an issue for the investors. The investors are quietly saying, we love you, you're the world's biggest company now, you're the most profitable. But when you bring this back, how much is it going to hurt us? And it's massive.
I think that tax issue is just a symptomatic of culture in many large organisations. Catherine mentioned about, Bob Dudley and the remuneration. That's just another reflection of, we can get away with this, so we'll do it. And I think by, particularly people in my role, in investment institutions, shareholders, if we don't hold these people to account, because ultimately they are managing our money and they are stewarding businesses. They don't own these businesses, they're stewarding them for the future. We need to hold them account and actually say this is unacceptable, and in some situations get rid of the CEO. So it's just reflective of a deep culture. More questions? We've got two up there, and one in the centre there.
Hi, I'm Natalie Tucker from Three Hands. One of the key messages that I take from what you've been talking about so far is this shift from CSR as a sideline to purpose being very much at the core of what businesses do. And thinking about the examples you talked about, so you talked about Unilever, I see that as a kind of old traditional business that has moved towards purpose being at its core, and Airbnb, which is a new business founded with purpose at its core. And I'm wondering what you see as being the drive for this shift towards purpose at the core. Do you see it coming more from the traditional businesses being able to transform themselves, or from new businesses that are founded in that way? I'm interested in the relationship between the two.
Okay.
Hugo Spars from River Simple, and a related question in that I very much agree that the purpose has to be the purpose, but do you not see the primary fiduciary responsibility to maximise shareholder value as being a structural barrier to that actually happening?
Okay. So what's driving CSR? Is it new businesses or incumbents? And is fiduciary duty actually the primary purpose of businesses? Any other questions? There's one in the centre and a gentleman that's there. Just there on.
Hi, Rick Banfield from Thurbridge. My question centres around the culture of short-termism, and you've touched upon it, talking about Paul Polman at Unilever on the first day and scrapping quarterly reporting, and it was kind of raised a little bit in the first talk this morning as well. But with the culture still focused on quarterly reporting and shareholders or the financial industry in general still demanding what's happening, where daily even reports or hourly reports or minute reports if you're investing in the markets, with that focus still there on that short-term reporting cycles, unless that culture changes within the finance industry, is anything else going to change really?
So what's the finance industry going to do to change that short-termism into a more long-term focus? So I'll take those three. Anybody like to grab any of those questions from the audience? Paul, I'll go Paul first and then Claudine.
So the PwC survey I referenced, which was 2016, that actually had a series of statistics which said the main reason that these 25% of businesses had repurposed themselves to put social in the mission was because they were seeing the rise of what they would call, they called it the caring consumer, which goes back to this other question that I think people don't realise how big that market is right now and that it's growing. And I think they particularly think, even when we get out of this blooming recession or this flatline in global growth, that it will really take off. So those CEOs who repurpose their business to put social more in the mission, it is primarily as a result of the markets that they can tap. I'm not aware yet that a lot of the Airbnbs do have social mission as a core part of it. I mean, every business has a mission or a purpose. It's where the social is part of it. What I am aware of is there is this massive growth now in social enterprise right across Europe and North America. And I think it's interesting for me, one of the problems is you can become too obsessed with what's happening in the PLCs, and particularly Unilever, and we all end up talking about Unilever every time we have one of these conferences. And there's a world outside the FTSE 350, a big world, much more exciting, much more challenging, much more vigorous. I mean, the FTSE 350 did not develop fair trade. It was people outside fair trade. 2/3 of fair trade is co-ops. So I don't want to get too obsessed with it, but why Unilever matters right now is I think Paul Polman has basically said, in coded language albeit, I can't go any further as a PLC. I now need to consider, do I reconstitute my business as a different organisational form, maybe a B corporation, in order to make the next steps? And how on earth do I take my shareholders with me? Now, there is some precedence for this in the US where Natura, which was a listed business in the States, a large one, actually repurposed itself and reconstituted itself as a B corporation. So, my understanding is there's a group of PLCs right now, brave PLCs, some of them don't even want the names to be known, who are sitting in rooms now trying to come up with saying, how can we break through this ceiling? Because we can't do it because of the short-termism of the majority, unfortunately, of investors, and we've still got this problem. A lot of investors aren't even active. Catherine knows this. They're passive. They just do shadow voting, tracker funds, etc. You can't even have a conversation with them because they're not active in it anyway.
So Paul, I'm going to quick shot there. Simon, quick points on those questions.
Yeah, again, I'll just really reinforce Paul's point. I think that what big companies have done is they've seen small companies with a social mission really starting to eat into their space. And what I worry about with the big companies is it's lip service, and they're just doing that because they think there's a market there, rather than actually this is something they genuinely care about. So I think you're absolutely right. I think for me, we've talked lots about the big companies, but I think it's small to medium-sized companies and startups, of which obviously in this country there are millions, and they employ more people than the large organisations do. It is they that are really driving this and making this happen, and they're the ones who are forcing the big companies to change, but I worry whether it's genuine. Coming back to your point.
Claudine?
Yeah, just a quick point around the reporting. I think reporting's changing. I sat in a room the other day at the Tomorrow's Company event, and all the really big institutional investors were there. They're the chief executives. And they were saying, I don't know why companies still have quarterly reporting, because nobody reads them. We don't read them. So that's a message that's got to get out to those companies. Say, don't do it. It's just a waste of time and space. So, and I think that's going to happen more and more. And with integrated reporting becoming, hopefully, ever more popular, I think, again, that's going to be a real transformational change.
And just to finish off, in terms of that, the reporting from an asset management perspective, firstly, rewards drive behaviours from the industry, so we need to change the way asset management companies reward their employees, because if they are rewarded for annual returns or annual performance, then they will push their holdings to do that. So we need to think about that very closely. Also, there are different parts of the industry. Certain parts of the industry do play on volatility. They want to see that share price up and down, move up and down, because they make money out of that. And we have to separate them from the long-term institutional investors, the pension funds, who want to invest in businesses over the 10, 20, 30-year cycles. I think that's critical. And just the final point around CSR and fiduciary duty, I think, you know, from my perspective, everything a business does ultimately will drive shareholder return and should drive shareholder return. Because if you do something for the community, you are increasing the reputation of your business, you're improving the lives of your employees, you're improving the environment in which they're operating, and you're running your business responsibly. Those three things are critical to any shareholder, you know, in any business. So I don't think the two are inseparable. I'm going to have to cut it there because I think we've run over a little. But thank you very much for your time. Thank you so much.